My name is Morgan Reynolds, 35, and until last month I was the best corporate negotiator Apex Global had ever seen. 10 years closing billion-dollar deals, never a single failure. Then came the day I stood before 12 international CEOs, orchestrating a $1.9 billion agreement, when my boss walked in and said those words, "Morgan, you are no longer needed." They expected me to crumble, to walk away defeated. What happened next changed everything. Before I tell you how I turned this career disaster into my greatest victory, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had to reinvent yourself after betrayal. My journey to that negotiation room began long before the betrayal. After graduating with my MBA from Harvard, I spent a decade honing my skills in the cutthroat world of corporate mergers and acquisitions. While other negotiators relied on intimidation or manipulation, I developed a different approach, genuine understanding combined with strategic positioning. I could read a room within minutes, identify each stakeholder's true motivations, and find the common ground nobody else could see. At Apex Global, an international infrastructure development corporation, my reputation grew with each successful deal. While most executives celebrated closing $100 million contracts, I routinely secured agreements worth 5 times that amount. My secret was relationship building. I never saw the people across the table as opponents, but as potential partners with needs that, properly aligned, could create mutual success. Despite my consistent results, the executive leadership team, predominantly male, remained skeptical. Comments like "she just got lucky" or "she charmed her way through" followed me through the halls of power. I worked twice as hard, for half the recognition, a familiar story for many women in corporate America. When the promotion to Executive VP of Strategic Partnerships was announced, the surprise was palpable. Several male colleagues who had been passed over made their disappointment known through cold shoulders and backhanded compliments. My new boss, Stephen Collins, seemed supportive on the surface, but I occasionally caught flashes of resentment when he thought no one was looking. Then came the opportunity that would define my career, a $1.9 billion cross-continental infrastructure project involving 12 separate companies across 4 continents. If successful, this mega deal would transform Apex Global from a major player to an industry leader. The project involved building sustainable transportation networks, connecting emerging markets, the kind of visionary endeavor that makes careers and cements legacies. The board assigned me as lead negotiator, much to Stephen's barely concealed displeasure. For 3 months, I prepared with meticulous attention to detail. My team and I worked 16-hour days researching each company's financial position, cultural considerations, and strategic priorities. We created detailed profiles of each CEO, understanding their negotiation styles, personal motivations, and potential deal breakers. I traveled to 9 countries, meeting each executive personally before the summit. With Hiroshi Tanaka from Japan, I discussed his passion for traditional architecture over dinner at his favorite restaurant in Tokyo. With Gabrielle Fontaine from France, I bonded over our shared love of Impressionist art during a walk through Paris. With James Wilson from Australia, I talked sustainable development while touring his renewable energy facility in Melbourne. These weren't just professional courtesies. They were strategic investments in relationship capital. By the time all 12 executives agreed to meet at our headquarters in New York, they weren't just coming for a business deal. They were coming because they trusted me personally to navigate their competing interests into a cohesive agreement that would benefit everyone. The night before the summit, Stephen called me into his office. His corner suite dwarfed my workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He leaned back in his Italian leather chair, fingers steepled. "Impressive work getting them all here, Morgan," he said, swirling his bourbon. "The board is watching this deal closely. Very closely." "We are ready," I assured him. 3 months of preparation, every contingency planned for. He nodded, but something in his expression unsettled me. "Just remember who you represent," he said. "Apex comes first, always." Of course, I replied, confused by the implication I might think otherwise. "Good luck tomorrow," he said, dismissing me with a wave. "Make us proud." Walking back to my office, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. This meeting represented everything I had worked for: recognition, respect, the opportunity to create something truly significant. After years of being underestimated and undermined, I was finally positioned to prove my value beyond any doubt. That evening, I reviewed my presentation one final time before heading home for a restless night's sleep. The morning of the summit, I arrived at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the executives were scheduled to appear. I personally inspected the conference room, checking everything from the temperature to the placement of name cards. Fresh flowers adorned the center of the massive oak table. Portfolios with custom materials awaited each participant. As my team arrived, I briefed them on last-minute details and contingency plans. Jessica Harris, my financial analyst, handed me the final projections. "We have got this," she whispered encouragingly. I straightened my navy blue suit, took a deep breath, and prepared to welcome 12 of the most powerful business leaders in the world. After 10 years of proving myself, this was my moment. Nothing could go wrong now. The first day began brilliantly. As each CEO arrived, I greeted them personally, referencing our previous conversations and making them feel instantly comfortable. When Akiko Yamamoto from Tokyo Tech Innovations mentioned her daughter's recent graduation, I inquired about the celebration. When Francisco Mendez from Brazilian Infrastructure Group commented on the unusual cool weather, I shared a light joke about bringing sunshine in our negotiations instead. By 9:30 a.m., all 12 executives were seated, engaged, and receptive. I opened with a comprehensive overview of the project's vision: sustainable transportation infrastructure, connecting 27 cities, across 4 continents, creating an estimated 89,000 jobs, and generating projected annual revenues of $340 million once completed. The energy in the room was electric. These weren't competitors today, but potential collaborators in something revolutionary. I carefully orchestrated the discussion, ensuring each CEO had equal time to express concerns and highlight priorities. By mid-morning, we were already making unexpected progress on regulatory alignment, typically one of the most contentious areas in multinational agreements. The first subtle sign of trouble came during the mid-morning break. Stephen entered the conference room, nodding cordially to the executives while barely acknowledging me. He pulled aside Thomas Blackwell, our CEO, whispering something that caused Thomas to glance sharply in my direction. When I approached them, their conversation abruptly ceased. "Everything going well?" I asked casually. "Carry on as planned," Thomas replied curtly before both men exited without further explanation. Returning to the negotiations, I maintained my composure while monitoring my phone discreetly. 3 text messages from Stephen appeared in quick succession. "Need detailed progress report immediately. Who is on board already? Send me all current commitment indicators." This was unusual. Our protocol specified no interruptions during active negotiations, with comprehensive briefings scheduled for evening debriefs. Why the sudden urgency? During lunch, I noticed Jessica looking concerned as she checked her tablet. When the executives engaged in private conversations, she pulled me aside. "Something strange is happening," she whispered. "Finance just requested all your preliminary agreements and working documents." "That makes no sense," I replied. "Everything was approved last week." And Derek from legal asked me if we had discussed alternative leadership scenarios for this deal. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile. "Probably just contingency planning. Let us focus on this afternoon's technical discussions." As we reconvened after lunch, I couldn't help noticing Stephen had returned, sitting quietly at the back of the room. This was unprecedented. The agreement had been that I would lead independently to maintain continuity. Worse, he had brought Philip Andrews, the company's chief legal officer, someone who typically only appeared for final signings. While guiding the group through potential revenue-sharing models, I overheard fragments of a phone conversation from the hallway, taking control of the situation. "Necessary adjustment to leadership. Confident we can salvage." Despite growing anxiety, I maintained perfect poise, directing the complex negotiations with practiced expertise. Several CEOs were already indicating preliminary agreement with the core frameworks. Hiroshi Tanaka even commented, "Morgan-san, your preparation makes this complex matter surprisingly straightforward." By late afternoon, we had successfully addressed 8 of the 12 major negotiation points, far exceeding typical first-day outcomes. The room buzzed with optimistic energy as we concluded for the day, with several executives making dinner plans together, a strong indicator of growing collaboration. As the CEOs departed, I approached Stephen to provide an update. He was huddled with Thomas and Philip in the corner, examining a document I didn't recognize. "Exceptional progress today," I began confidently. We have preliminary agreement on 60% of key terms, including the most contentious regulatory issues. Stephen barely looked up. Good. We will take it from here tomorrow. Take it from here, I don't understand. The board feels we need a different approach for day 2, he replied vaguely. We will discuss in the morning. Go home and rest. That night, sleep evaded me entirely. I reviewed the contract details again and again, searching for any potential issue they might have identified. Had I missed something crucial? Was there a legal complication? I hadn't anticipated. The financing structure was innovative but solid. The regulatory compliance framework addressed all major jurisdictions. I called Jessica at midnight. Have you heard anything? I asked without preamble. Only whispers, she replied cautiously. Stephen assembled several department heads after hours. There is talk about restructuring the approach, whatever that means. This makes no sense, I said, frustration mounting. We are exceeding all projections. The CEOs are engaged and moving toward agreement faster than anticipated. Morgan, be careful tomorrow, Jessica warned. Something doesn't feel right. I ended the call and stared at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing every aspect of the next day's negotiations. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, I was determined to maintain control of this deal. After all, I had brought these 12 executives together. They trusted me, not Stephen, not Thomas, not the Apex board. Tomorrow, I would demonstrate precisely why I had been given this responsibility in the first place. Little did I know that in less than 12 hours, my career at Apex would implode in the most public, humiliating way possible. Day 2 began with renewed energy. Despite my sleepless night, I arrived early, reviewing my notes and preparing for the final push toward agreement. Today's agenda covered the most complex aspects of the deal: financial commitments, risk allocation, and implementation timelines. By day's end, if all went according to plan, we would have preliminary signatures on memorandums of understanding from all 12 companies. The executives arrived in good spirits, many exchanging friendly conversation from dinner discussions the previous evening. I began the session with a concise recap of our progress and outlined our objectives for the day. Yesterday, we established the framework for collaboration, I explained, standing confidently at the head of the table. Today, we transform that framework into actionable commitments. By addressing your specific concerns about financial exposure and implementation, I believe we can achieve something truly historic. For the first hour, everything proceeded flawlessly. We navigated through complex financing arrangements, with each CEO gradually becoming more comfortable with their company's role in the broader project. James Wilson from Australia was particularly enthusiastic, already discussing potential expansion possibilities beyond the initial scope. At approximately 10:15 a.m., the conference room door opened. Stephen entered, followed by Thomas Blackwell, our CEO, and 3 board members I recognized from quarterly meetings. My initial thought was they had come to observe our progress, perhaps in preparation for a celebratory announcement later. I acknowledged them with a professional nod and continued guiding the discussion on implementation timelines. Mid-sentence, Stephen cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse the interruption," he announced to the room. "There has been a change in plans." I paused, momentarily confused, but maintaining my composure. The executives looked between Stephen and me, sensing the sudden tension. Stephen moved to the front of the room, effectively displacing me from my position. "Morgan, you are no longer needed for this negotiation. The board has decided a different approach is required at this stage." The room fell into stunned silence. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some confused, others uncomfortable, a few showing flashes of concern. "I do not understand," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We are making exceptional progress." Thomas Blackwell stepped forward. "This is not up for discussion. Please collect your materials and exit the room. Security will escort you to gather your personal belongings." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the doorway. Guards I had greeted every morning for 5 years now stood ready to remove me from the building. "This is highly irregular," Francisco Mendez interjected. We were in the middle of a productive discussion. "Apex Global appreciates your concern," Thomas replied smoothly. "However, this is an internal matter. Stephen will be taking over leadership of these negotiations, effective immediately." With all eyes on me, I had seconds to decide my response. Causing a scene would only validate whatever narrative they were constructing about me. With as much dignity as I could muster, I gathered my portfolio and notes. "It has been my sincere pleasure working with each of you," I said to the executives, my voice miraculously steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I wish you all success with this important project." As I walked toward the door, Gabrielle Fontaine called out, "Morgan, this is most unexpected. Will you be rejoining us later?" Before I could answer, Stephen intervened. "Morgan will be transitioning to other responsibilities. Now shall we continue with the financial structure discussion?" The security guards flanked me as I exited the conference room, the culmination of 3 months' work and 10 years of career building evaporating behind me. In the hallway, Jessica stood wide-eyed, having witnessed the entire scene through the glass wall. "What is happening?" she whispered as I passed. "I have no idea," I managed to reply. The guards led me to my office, where I was given 15 minutes to collect personal items. My computer access had already been revoked. Family photos, industry awards, and a decade of memories went into a cardboard box while a guard watched impassively. When I attempted to use my access badge to reach the executive floor for explanation, it beeped red, denied. Whatever was happening had been planned well in advance. The head of Human Resources, Patricia Nelson, intercepted me in the lobby, her expression professionally sympathetic but distant. "Morgan, if you will follow me to our meeting room, we can discuss transition details." The meeting room was a small, windowless space near the building exit typically used for terminating lower-level employees. I sat numbly as Patricia slid a document across the table. "Apex Global is implementing strategic restructuring," she recited mechanically. "Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. This severance package includes 4 months' salary and continuation of benefits for 30 days. My position was eliminated while I was actively leading a billion-dollar negotiation," I asked incredulously. Patricia avoided eye contact. "The decision comes from the highest levels of leadership. The severance agreement includes a non-disparagement clause and requires you to transfer all work-related materials." "What about the deal?" "Those executives came because of my relationships with them." "That is no longer your concern," she replied flatly. "We need your signature acknowledging receipt of these terms." In a daze, I scrawled my signature, took my copy of the agreement, and walked through the lobby toward the exit. Employees I had worked alongside for years quickly averted their eyes. News traveled fast. Outside, the spring sunshine seemed obscenely cheerful against the darkness enveloping me. I hailed a taxi, clutching my box of belongings, and gave my address in a voice I barely recognized as my own. As the taxi navigated through Manhattan traffic, the full weight of what had happened began to crush me. Not only had I been fired, but I had been deliberately humiliated in front of 12 of the most influential executives in the industry. My professional reputation, meticulously built over a decade, potentially destroyed in a single morning. The taxi driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Rough day, lady." I nodded, unable to speak, as tears finally broke free. Years of maintaining perfect composure in high-pressure situations dissolved into quiet sobs as we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. By the time I reached my apartment, my mind was cycling through confusion, shock, and the devastating realization that my career might never recover from this blow. Inside my apartment, I placed the cardboard box on my kitchen counter and stared at it. 10 years reduced to a few mementos and a severance agreement. My phone, which normally buzzed constantly with messages, remained ominously silent. In the corporate world, bad news traveled instantly while loyalty evaporated just as quickly. No one wanted to be associated with someone who had fallen from grace so spectacularly. I kicked off my heels, collapsed onto my sofa, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. Everything I had sacrificed for suddenly felt meaningless. The missed family gatherings, the relationships that withered under my work schedule, the personal life perpetually on hold while I climbed the corporate ladder. All for a company that could discard me without explanation, in the most humiliating manner possible. As I curled into myself sobbing, I had no idea that within hours the true story would begin to emerge, or that this devastating moment would become the catalyst for the most important battle of my professional life. The initial breakdown lasted for hours. I cycled through tears, numbness, and moments of paralyzing anxiety about my future. By late afternoon, I had progressed to staring blankly at my living room wall, still wearing my professional suit now wrinkled from hours on the sofa. The carefully applied makeup I had put on that morning was smeared across my face, physical evidence of my unraveling. My phone, which I had tossed aside upon arriving home, suddenly chimed with a text message, then another, and another. After the silence, the sudden activity startled me back to awareness. The first message was from Jessica meeting falling apart after you left. S has no idea what he is doing. CEO's asking about you repeatedly. The second, they changed key terms in the agreement, completely different from what you negotiated. And the third most surprising, Tanaka-san and Fontaine walked out, said they came to negotiate with you, not a substitute teacher, direct quote. As I read these messages, my phone rang. It was Bethany Wilson, my loyal executive assistant, who had been with me for 3 years. Morgan, I cannot talk long, she whispered. They think I am in the bathroom. It is a disaster in here. What is happening? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. After you left, Stephen tried to continue but did not understand half the agreements you had structured. When he attempted to introduce new terms, Hiroshi Tanaka asked if this was some kind of American negotiation tactic. Francisco called it bait and switch, and threatened to leave. Are they still meeting? Technically, but it is falling apart. 3 CEOs have already left the building, 2 others are on phones with their boards. Thomas looks like he is about to have a stroke. Why did they do this, Bethany? It makes no sense to remove me mid-negotiation. Listen, she whispered urgently. Jennifer from legal just sent me something you need to see. I will forward it now. Have to go before they notice I am gone too long. Moments after we disconnected, an email arrived from Bethany containing a forwarded message with an attached document. The email was from Stephen to Thomas, and the board dated 2 weeks earlier. As discussed, I believe we need to reassert control over the multinational infrastructure project. Morgan Reynolds has established initial relationships, but as we move to finalization, a more experienced hand is required. Having a woman lead such significant negotiations sends the wrong message to our international partners, many of whom come from traditional business cultures. I can personally guarantee successful closure if given leadership of the final stages. Recommend transitioning Reynolds immediately before the summit to minimize disruption. Attached was a memo outlining a leadership transition plan with my termination already scheduled, regardless of the negotiations' progress. Most shocking was the paragraph justifying my removal. While Reynolds has technical competence, the scale of this agreement requires gravitas and authority that she fundamentally lacks. The board should consider this an opportunity to correct the premature promotion decision made 6 months ago, which several senior leaders cautioned against at the time. I stared at the screen, disbelief transforming into white-hot rage. This had nothing to do with my performance. They had planned to remove me before the negotiations even began purely because of my gender. The premature promotion they referenced had come after I consistently outperformed every other executive in my division for 5 consecutive years. As I processed this revelation, another email arrived from Jennifer in legal, someone I had worked closely with on numerous deals. Morgan, what they did was unconscionable. You should know they have already drafted press materials taking credit for your work. They are claiming Stephen rescued negotiations you supposedly mishandled. I cannot stay silent about this. Documentation attached if you need it. The attached files included internal presentations where Stephen had literally erased my name from strategy documents I had created, replaced with his own. There were also emails discussing how to reframe the narrative around the project's leadership to minimize my contributions. My phone chimed again with texts from Jessica. Board members in panic mode. Stock already down 4% on rumors deal is collapsing. Thomas just yelled at Stephen in hallway. You promised this would be seamless. What the hell happened? Overheard S saying, she complicated everything unnecessarily. Give me 1 more day to simplify the approach. With each message, my anger intensified. This wasn't just about my career anymore. This was about fundamental injustice, about men taking credit for women's work, about the pervasive belief that only men could handle significant responsibility regardless of evidence to the contrary. I opened my laptop and began searching business news. Several financial sites already carried brief mentions of leadership changes at Apex Global amid one of the company's largest potential deals. One analyst speculated about potential instability in the company's negotiation team. As evening fell, my phone rang again. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't expected. Gabrielle Fontaine, CEO of European Transportation Consortium. Morgan, she said when I answered, her French accent pronounced. I hope I am not overstepping by calling your personal number. Not at all, Gabrielle, I replied, struggling to maintain composure. How did you get it? You provided it during our meeting in Paris, remember? For emergencies. She paused. I consider this situation an emergency of sorts. What situation is that? I asked carefully. The complete collapse of what was under your guidance a promising collaboration. Her tone was matter of fact. 3 hours after your departure, half the participants were preparing to return to their respective countries. The replacement negotiator, your former boss, I believe, lacks both the detailed understanding and the trust relationships necessary. I am sorry to hear that. I said, genuinely disappointed that the project might fail. The question several of us are asking, she continued, is, what actually happened? The explanation provided was, how do you say? Not credible. I wish I could tell you, Gabrielle. I am still trying to understand it myself. Well, Morgan, when you do understand, please know that many of us would be interested in hearing your perspective. We came to New York because of our confidence in you, not simply Apex Global. After ending the call, I sat in my darkened apartment, mind racing. The messages continued arriving throughout the evening, painting a clear picture of chaos in the negotiations I had so carefully orchestrated. By midnight, I learned that the day had ended with no agreements signed, and at least 7 CEOs, indicating they might withdraw completely. The business news grew more specific as evening turned to night. Financial reporters were now directly questioning whether Apex Global had made a catastrophic error in changing negotiation leadership. The company's stock had closed down 8%, representing hundreds of millions in lost market value. Around 2 a.m., exhausted but too wired to sleep, I received one final text from Bethany. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Subject: Project Salvage Strategy. They made this bed. Now they're lying in it. As I finally prepared for bed, the devastation of the morning had transformed into something else entirely: fierce determination. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and attempted to erase my contributions. But in doing so, they had made a critical error. They had given me nothing left to lose. Tomorrow I would begin planning my response. Not just for my own vindication, but for every woman who had ever been sidelined, underestimated, or robbed of credit for her work. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I gave myself 48 hours to strategize. No reactive decisions, no emotional responses, no burning bridges in anger. This situation required precision documentation and perfect timing. I had learned these skills negotiating billion-dollar deals. Now I would apply them to the most important negotiation of my life, the one for my professional future. The morning after my termination, I watched Apex Global's stock continue its downward slide, dropping another 3% in early trading. Business news now openly speculated about turmoil in the multinational negotiation process, with one financial analyst questioning the company's stability and leadership. My first call was to Eleanor Washington, a former mentor who now sat on the board of a competing infrastructure firm. We had maintained our relationship discreetly over the years, meeting quarterly for lunch to discuss industry trends. This is blatant discrimination, Eleanor said, after hearing the full story, and monumentally stupid from a business perspective. They removed the one person who could close this deal. I need advice, Eleanor, not just sympathy. What would you do in my position? Document everything, she replied without hesitation. Every contribution you made, every relationship you built, every strategy you developed. Create an irrefutable record that proves your value and exposes their folly. And then what? Then you wait for them to realize their mistake. Trust me, Morgan, they will come crawling back when this deal collapses. The question is, what will your terms be when they do? Following Eleanor's advice, I spent the next day creating a comprehensive portfolio of my contributions. I compiled meeting notes, strategy documents, financial projections, and relationship development records. I created a detailed timeline showing how each aspect of the negotiation framework had evolved under my leadership. Most importantly, I documented the gender bias evident in Stephen's communications. The phrases "lax gravitas" and "wrong message to international partners" were thinly veiled sexism, implying that only a man could successfully lead significant negotiations. On the second day after my termination, I began reaching out to select executives from the negotiation. I chose carefully, contacting only those with whom I had established the strongest personal rapport, Hiroshi Tanaka, Gabrielle Fontaine, and James Wilson. My messages were measured and professional, expressing regret for the disruption to the promising collaboration we had begun. I asked for their perspective on what had transpired after my departure, framing it as valuable input for my professional development. Their responses were illuminating and supportive. From Hiroshi: your abrupt removal was most disturbing. The replacement negotiator lacked your comprehensive understanding of our regulatory concerns. When questioned, he became defensive rather than collaborative. From Gabrielle: we came because of trust in you personally, Morgan. Your successor attempted to change key terms we had already agreed upon. This destroyed confidence immediately. From James: after 3 hours with the new team, I called my board and recommended we pause engagement. Something fundamentally changed in the approach, and not for the better. Each message confirmed what Jessica and Bethany had reported. Without my leadership, the carefully constructed negotiation was unraveling rapidly. The executives had traveled from around the world based on relationships I had built, prepared to sign agreements I had structured. The substitution of Stephen, with his aggressive approach and limited understanding of the nuanced terms, had shattered their confidence. By the afternoon, Jessica texted again. Complete standstill today. Trying to simplify deal structure but missing key regulatory components you designed. CEOs asking legal teams to review everything from scratch now. I also learned that several participants had directly questioned my absence with Francisco Mendez, apparently asking, did you fire the only person who understood all aspects of this agreement? While monitoring these developments, I received an unexpected call from Timothy Green, one of Apex Global's board members. We had interacted occasionally at company events, and he had always seemed more progressive than his peers. Morgan, he began awkwardly, I hope you are doing well under the circumstances. As well as can be expected after being publicly humiliated and terminated without cause, I replied evenly. He cleared his throat. Yes, well, about that. Some of us on the board are concerned about how the transition was handled. Transition is an interesting euphemism for what happened. The point is, he continued, the negotiations appear to be facing some challenges. I am aware. The thing is, Morgan, several participants have specifically asked about your involvement. They seem to feel your understanding of the complex regulatory framework was unique. I spent 3 months building that framework, Timothy. Of course it was unique. A long pause followed. Would you be open to a conversation about the situation, hypothetically speaking? I am always open to conversations, I replied carefully. Whether anything comes of them depends entirely on the terms being discussed. After ending the call, I felt the first glimmer of leverage returning. They were beginning to realize their mistake exactly as Eleanor had predicted, but I wasn't interested in simply returning to the status quo. This situation demanded substantial change. That evening, I created a detailed presentation titled Path to Successful Completion, outlining exactly how the negotiation could be salvaged. The document highlighted the key relationships I had built, the regulatory frameworks I had designed, and the confidence I had established with all 12 executives. Most crucially, I included a section called Terms for Re-engagement, which specified 1. Public acknowledgement of my work and leadership. 2. Reinstatement, with promotion to Senior Executive Vice President. 3. Direct reporting line to the CEO, bypassing Stephen. 4. Commitment to addressing gender bias in executive leadership. 5. Formal apology for the manner of my removal. As I finalized this document, Bethany called with breaking news. Emergency board meeting just ended. Stock down 12% in 2 days. Thomas looks like he hasn't slept. 3 board members confronted Stephen about promises he made regarding the transition. What happened? I asked. Stephen claimed you had overcomplicated the agreements and that he needed more time to streamline the approach. Timothy Green asked why, if that was the case, 7 executives were now threatening to withdraw completely. And what was Stephen's response? He had none, just stammered about cultural misunderstandings. Morgan, they are panicking. This deal was supposed to transform the company. Now it is on life support. The following morning, the 3rd day after my termination, Timothy Green called again. The board has authorized me to discuss potential consulting arrangements, he began, attempting to sound casual, on the multinational infrastructure project. Consulting arrangements, I repeated slowly. That is your proposal. We recognize your valuable contributions and unique relationships with the participating executives. Let me be clear, Timothy. I was publicly humiliated and removed from negotiations I had spent months orchestrating based on gender discrimination documented in company communications. My reputation in the industry was potentially damaged. And your solution is to offer me a consulting arrangement. Silence followed. I have prepared a document outlining what would be required for my re-engagement, I continued. I will send it to you now. The board has 24 hours to respond before I pursue other options. What other options? He asked, tension evident in his voice. I have received 3 inquiries from your competitors since news of my departure became public. Additionally, several business publications have requested interviews about my perspective on leadership changes at Apex during critical negotiations. I have declined comment thus far, but my silence is not indefinite. After sending my terms, I waited. The stock continued falling, now down 15% from before my termination. Financial analysts began questioning the company's leadership stability. Business News reported that several CEOs had already departed New York, returning to their respective countries without signing any agreements. At 9:15 the following morning, exactly 72 hours after I had been escorted from the building, Timothy Green called again. The board has reviewed your terms, he said without preamble. And we would like to meet with you, today, if possible. Where and when? I asked, already knowing the answer. The company would prefer discretion at this stage. A private conference room at the Four Seasons at 11 a.m. I will be there, I replied. And Timothy, tell them to bring the paperwork reflecting all my terms. I do not intend to negotiate on any point. As I prepared for the meeting, I felt remarkably calm. 3 days earlier, I had been devastated, my career seemingly in ruins. Now I was walking into a meeting with the power entirely on my side. They needed me far more than I needed them. This was not about revenge. It was about justice recognition and ensuring that what happened to me would not happen to other women at Apex Global in the future. With this clarity of purpose, I selected my most confident outfit, a crimson suit I reserved for the most challenging negotiations, and headed to the meeting that would determine not just my future, but potentially reshape the culture of an ARICO. Entière Corporation. The Four Seasons private conference room exuded discreet luxury, with mahogany paneling and views of Central Park through floor-to-ceiling windows. I arrived 10 minutes early, a habit from years of high-stakes negotiations. Being first in the room conferred subtle psychological advantage. At precisely 11 a.m., the door opened. Timothy Green entered, followed by Thomas Blackwell, our CEO, and Patricia Nelson from Human Resources. Notably absent was Stephen Collins. They carried leather portfolios and expressions of barely concealed desperation. I remained seated as they entered a deliberate inversion of power dynamics. In normal circumstances, everyone would stand for the CEO. Thank you for meeting with us, Morgan Thomas began, his typical commanding tone, replaced by something approaching humility. Let us dispense with pleasantries, I replied coolly. The multinational infrastructure project is collapsing. Your stock has lost nearly $500 million in market value in 3 days, and you have 12 international executives questioning the stability of your leadership. I assume you have reviewed my terms. Thomas exchanged glances with Timothy. We have. Most are acceptable with minor modifications. There will be no modifications, I stated flatly. My terms are not a negotiating position. They are requirements for my return. Patricia slid a document across the table. We have prepared a new employment agreement, reflecting your requested title and reporting structure. I reviewed it carefully, noting they had indeed included the Senior Executive Vice President title and direct reporting line to the CEO. The compensation package showed a 40% increase from my previous salary, more than I had specified. The public acknowledgement, I asked without looking up. We have drafted a press release announcing your expanded role in leading the multinational project, Timothy replied. May I see it? He handed me a single page. The release described my return to leadership of the negotiations, but made no mention of the circumstances of my removal or any acknowledgement of error on the company's part. This is inadequate, I said, placing it aside. The announcement needs to explicitly state that my removal was a mistake and that the company recognizes my essential role in establishing the negotiation framework. That would create significant liability concerns, Patricia interjected. Your liability concerns began the moment Stephen put in writing that having a woman lead negotiations sends the wrong message, I countered. I have copies of those communications, as do several others. Silence fell across the table. Thomas looked genuinely shocked. You were not aware of those communications, I asked, watching his expression carefully. I was told this was a strategic restructuring decision, he replied slowly. Then you were misled. I have documentation proving gender discrimination was a primary factor in my removal. Documentation that would be of great interest to both the press and regulatory authorities. Thomas's face hardened. What exactly do you want, Morgan? Exactly what my terms state. Public acknowledgement of the error in removing me, reinstatement with promotion, direct reporting to you, and a company-wide commitment to addressing gender bias in leadership. And the formal apology, Timothy asked. That can be private between the individuals involved and myself, but it must be sincere and unequivocal. Thomas stood abruptly and paced to the window. The board is prepared to meet your terms with the condition that you return immediately to salvage the negotiations. Today. I will return this afternoon on 2 conditions, I replied. First, the press release goes out exactly as I will rewrite it before I enter the building. Second, you personally introduce me to the remaining executives and clarify that I have full authority to complete these negotiations as I see fit. And Stephen, Thomas asked. Stephen remains involved, but in a supporting role only. His presence provides continuity while reinforcing my leadership. Removing him entirely would create unnecessary disruption. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, the revised press release had been distributed to major business publications. It stated clearly that Apex Global was returning leadership of the multinational infrastructure negotiations to Senior Executive Vice President Morgan Reynolds, acknowledging her crucial role in establishing the groundbreaking framework and expressing regret for the brief interruption in her leadership of this historic project. At 3 p.m., I walked through the Apex Global lobby, turning heads, as employees recognized the negotiator who had been publicly removed just days earlier. Bethany waited by the elevator, eyes wide with excitement. 9 executives still here, she whispered, as we ascended. 3 dialed in remotely. They are all waiting in the main conference room. Outside the conference room, Thomas met me with an extended hand. They are expecting us. I will make the introduction as agreed. As we entered, I saw 9 of the 12 CEOs seated around the table, with 3 video conference screens showing the executives who had already returned to their countries. All conversations ceased as they noticed me. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas began formally. Apex Global is pleased to announce that Senior Executive Vice President Morgan Reynolds has returned to lead these negotiations to completion. The company recognizes that her vision and relationships have been instrumental in bringing us together, and we are committed to supporting her leadership without further interruption. Francisco Mendez broke into spontaneous applause, quickly joined by several others. Hiroshi Tanaka offered a respectful bow. Gabrielle Fontaine simply smiled knowingly. Thomas continued. Morgan will have full authority to finalize all aspects of this agreement with the company's complete confidence. He gestured to Stephen, who stood uncomfortably in the corner. Mr. Collins will remain available for support as needed. As Thomas exited, I took my position at the head of the table, the same spot from which I had been removed 3 days earlier. The symmetry was not lost on anyone present. Thank you all for your patience during this transitional period. I began deliberately understating the chaos. I suggest we return to the regulatory framework we had established on our first day, with specific attention to the cross-jurisdictional compliance mechanisms. For the next 4 hours, I methodically rebuilt the negotiation, re-establishing trust and momentum. The executives responded with visible relief, returning to the collaborative spirit we had initially created. When questions arose about the interruption in leadership, I deflected gracefully, focusing instead on the path forward. Stephen remained largely silent, speaking only when directly addressed. The tension between us was palpable, but I maintained absolute professionalism, occasionally asking for his input on specific points to demonstrate collaborative leadership. By 7 p.m., we had recovered most of the ground lost during the disruption. I suggested continuing early the following morning, and the executives agreed enthusiastically. As they departed for dinner, several made a point of expressing their satisfaction with my return. "The ship rights itself when the proper captain returns," Francisco commented loud enough for Stephen to hear. The following day proceeded with remarkable efficiency. With trust restored and the framework re-established, we moved rapidly through the remaining points of negotiation. By mid-afternoon, all 12 executives had agreed in principle to the core terms of the agreement. At 4:30 p.m., we gathered for the formal signing of memorandums of understanding. Thomas returned with several board members, including Timothy Green, to witness this historic moment. Photographers documented each executive signing the preliminary agreements with me at the center of the arrangement. When all signatures were secured, Thomas offered a toast to international collaboration and visionary leadership, carefully avoiding specific attribution. As glasses were raised, Stephen approached the front of the room. "If I may," he said, his voice strained but controlled, "I would like to acknowledge Morgan Reynolds' exceptional work in bringing this historic agreement to fruition. Her understanding of the complex regulatory landscape and her ability to build meaningful relationships across cultural boundaries have been instrumental." The acknowledgement, clearly difficult for him to deliver, represented the private apology I had required. I nodded acceptance, knowing this public recognition was far more valuable than any private words could have been. As the celebration continued, Timothy approached me quietly. "The stock is up 11% since the announcement of your return. The board is extremely pleased with the outcome." "The outcome was never in doubt," I replied. "The only question was, who would receive credit for it?" By evening's end, all 12 memorandums of understanding were signed. The executives were celebrating their historic collaboration, and I had reclaimed not just my position but something far more valuable, irrefutable proof of my tubal capabilities and the recognition they deserved. As I left the building that night, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, but something more profound, the quiet confidence of someone who had fought for justice and prevailed. The path forward would bring new challenges, but I would face them from a position of unprecedented strength. The weeks following the successful signing of the memorandums were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. The business press covered the historic multinational infrastructure agreement extensively, with my name prominently featured in most articles. Apex Global's stock fully recovered and climbed to new heights as analysts projected the long-term impact of the $1.9 billion project. Internally, my return created ripples throughout the organization. Some colleagues avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the public nature of my dismissal and reinstatement. Others approached with newfound respect, aware that I had successfully challenged the status quo and emerged stronger. The company issued a formal statement about my crucial leadership in securing the multinational agreement, carefully worded to emphasize my contributions, while avoiding any explicit acknowledgement of wrongdoing in my temporary removal. In corporate communications, such half measures were considered significant victories. 2 weeks after the signing ceremony, Thomas Blackwell requested a private meeting in his office. The same corner suite where I had met with Stephen before the fateful negotiation now felt different, less intimidating. Morgan Thomas began once we were seated. "The board is extremely pleased with the outcome of the infrastructure negotiations." "As am I," I replied simply. "We have been discussing the circumstances surrounding your brief departure from the company." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "After reviewing certain communications, it has become clear that unconscious bias may have influenced some decisions." "There was nothing unconscious about it, Thomas. The bias was explicitly stated in writing." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that has been addressed with the individuals involved. But more importantly, we recognize the need for structural changes to prevent similar situations in the future." "What kind of structural changes?" "For starters, Stephen Collins has been reassigned to head our South American division effective immediately." The reassignment was essentially a demotion disguised as a lateral move, taking Stephen far from the corporate headquarters and the power center of the company. It was a significant consequence for his actions. "Additionally," Thomas continued, "the board has approved your promotion to Chief Strategy Officer with a permanent seat on the executive committee. This exceeded even my negotiated terms, placing me among the top 5 executives in the corporation, with direct influence over company-wide strategy and governance. And most importantly," he added, "we are implementing a comprehensive review of our promotion practices, mentorship programs, and leadership development initiatives, with specific attention to gender equity issues. "Who will lead that review?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "We hoped you would," he replied. "No one is better positioned to identify the barriers that have limited advancement opportunities for women in our organization." I accepted the new role and responsibilities, recognizing the opportunity to create meaningful change from within. The promotion to Chief Strategy Officer represented not just personal advancement, but a platform from which to influence corporate culture. The healing process, however, extended far beyond professional recognition. The public humiliation and betrayal had left emotional wounds that required deliberate attention. I began working with Dr. Elizabeth Martin, a therapist specializing in workplace trauma. Our weekly sessions helped me process the anger, anxiety, and lingering trust issues stemming from the experience. "What you encountered wasn't just office politics," Dr. Martin explained during one session. "It was a profound betrayal in a setting where you had invested your identity and self-worth. Healing requires acknowledging the legitimate pain of that experience." Gradually, I developed healthier boundaries between my personal identity and professional role. I reconnected with family members who had taken distant second place to my career ambitions for years. Weekend brunches with my sister Diane became sacred time free from work discussions. Monthly visits to my parents in Connecticut restored relationships that had weakened during my single-minded career focus. I also established clearer work-life boundaries. No more 16-hour days as standard practice. No more missed vacations due to critical projects. I realized that the company would take everything I offered without hesitation. It was my responsibility to define limits. Within 3 months of my reinstatement, I launched the Women in Strategic Leadership Mentorship Program at Apex Global. The initiative paired promising female employees with senior executives, creating pathways for advancement that had previously existed only through informal, predominantly male networks. During the program's inaugural event, a junior analyst asked how I had found the courage to challenge such powerful opposition. "Courage wasn't the decisive factor," I explained. "It was clarity. When you know unequivocally that an injustice has occurred, and you have the evidence to prove it, action becomes necessary rather than optional." 6 months after the negotiation crisis, Stephen Collins resigned from Apex Global to pursue other opportunities. The real story, whispered through company channels, was that his effectiveness had been fatally compromised by the public reversal of his leadership grab. In corporate ecosystems, such failed power moves rarely go unpunished. On the anniversary of my reinstatement, I received an unexpected email from Gabrielle Fontaine, who had become a valuable business partner and personal ally. "Morgan, 1 year ago today, I witnessed something remarkable, a woman who refused to accept erasure. Your stance that day changed more than your own trajectory. It altered how I approach leadership in my own organization, particularly regarding talented women facing institutional barriers. Some battles must be fought not just for ourselves, but for those who will follow." With admiration, Gabrielle. Her message crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. My personal struggle had evolved into something larger. By refusing to accept unjust treatment, I had created ripples extending far beyond my individual circumstances. The most profound healing came through helping others navigate similar challenges. I began speaking candidly with women across the organization about the obstacles I had faced and the strategies that proved effective. These conversations, often conducted over coffee, rather than in formal settings, created an unofficial support network that gradually transformed the company culture from within. During one such conversation, a promising director named Heather confided that she had been passed over for promotion 3 times while watching male colleagues with lesser results advance. "Document everything," I advised her, sharing the approach that had proven so crucial in my own situation. "Your results, your contributions, the metrics that demonstrate your value. When the moment comes to advocate for yourself, evidence is more powerful than assertion." 3 months later, Heather was promoted to vice president after presenting a compelling case for her advancement, supported by meticulous documentation of her achievements. The wisdom I gained through this journey, centered on a fundamental truth: power comes from competence, not position. My value had never depended on a title or organizational chart placement, but on the unique capabilities I brought to complex challenges. When those capabilities became indisputably evident, the formal recognition inevitably followed. I also learned that betrayal, painful as it is, often serves as redirection rather than termination. Being forced off my expected path revealed strengths and possibilities I might never have discovered otherwise. The very public nature of my humiliation ultimately created the conditions for a more visible triumph. Perhaps most importantly, I recognize that maintaining integrity when others abandon it creates its own form of power. By refusing to engage in the politics of personal destruction even when provoked, I preserved something essential: the moral authority that comes from choosing principle over expedience. 1 year after the negotiation crisis, I stood at the window of my expanded office, now overlooking the same Manhattan skyline once visible only from the CEO's suite. The multinational infrastructure project was progressing ahead of schedule, already creating economic opportunities across 4 continents. My team had expanded to include some of the company's most talented strategists, drawn by the culture of excellence and fairness we had established. The journey from public humiliation to professional triumph had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of resilience, justice, and authentic power. Sometimes being pushed off your path shows you the strength of your wings. Have you ever faced a betrayal that ultimately redirected you towards something better? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of overcoming workplace sabotage resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that setbacks can become setups for comebacks. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to recognize it.